This video was created using artificial intelligence. All voices and characters are not real. This video is made for educational and informational purposes only. We do not promote hate, misinformation, or political bias. If you are a true history lover and you want to uncover the hidden truths of the past, if you are ready to open the darkest pages of history, then subscribe to Vault of Centuries. Here, we explore the stories that time tried to erase. We reveal forgotten legends, buried secrets, and the harsh truths that never made it into school books. We don't just tell history, we reveal it. Welcome to Vault of Centuries. Today, I want to tell you a story that doesn't begin on a battlefield, but around kitchen tables, in quiet homes, and in fields where ordinary people dreamed of something extraordinary. A story of a people who never asked for war, who didn't want violence, but were forced to fight for a voice, a future, and the right to simply be free. This story isn't just about generals or armies. It's about blacksmiths and bakers, farmers and school teachers. It's about women who wrote letters and children who carried secret messages. It's about a generation that stood up not just to win a war, but to light a fire that would burn across the world for centuries to come. The year was 1765. The American colonies were thriving, rich lands, strong communities, loyal to the British crown. But beneath the surface, resentment was growing. Britain had fought expensive wars, and now it wanted the colonies to pay. New taxes, no vote, no say. The cry began. No taxation without representation. But it wasn't just about taxes. It was about dignity. It was about the right to be heard. And slowly, what started as peaceful protests turned into something far greater. A movement, a revolution. Imagine being there. You're a 25-year-old farmer. You've never fired a gun in your life. You've got a wife, 2 kids, and a field of corn. And now you're being asked to fight, not for a king, but for an idea, that power should come from the people, not from a throne thousands of miles away. And they fought, not with high-tech weapons or war machines, but with muskets, courage, and hope. United Kingdom against them stood the greatest military on earth. The British redcoats, trained, disciplined, ruthless, yet time and time again, the ragtag American militias pushed back. But victory did not come easily. Thousands died. Cities were burned. Families were torn apart. Loyalists, those who stayed true to Britain, were hunted, imprisoned, or exiled. Native tribes were pushed further from their lands. Slavery still thrived, even in a revolution built on liberty. And women, they were left out of the history books, even though they, too, fought in every way they could. But even with all these flaws, something had changed. Something bigger than a single war. An idea had been born, that a government should serve its people, that all men and eventually all people should be free. This is the story of how the United States began. Not from perfection, but from pain, sacrifice, and vision. A nation born not in comfort, but in chaos. And even though centuries have passed, the fire they lit still burns. This is not just history. This is the legacy of revolution. This is the story of America's fight for freedom. This is the beginning of something powerful. There was a time when America didn't exist. Just 13 colonies, ruled by a king across the ocean, who taxed the people, silenced their voices, and sent soldiers into their homes. A single shot changed everything. On April 19, 1775, In the small town of Lexington, Massachusetts, a group of farmers and shopkeepers stood face to face with the world's strongest army. That gunfire? It wasn't just the start of a battle. It was the spark that lit a revolution. How did 13 different colonies, full of merchants, planters, and ordinary people, dare to stand against the powerful British Empire? And more importantly, how did they win? They won because they fought for freedom. They fought for a new future. They fought to build a new nation. A war of courage, of ideas, and of people who believed in freedom. A war that gave birth to the United States of America. This is the story before America was even a country. Back then, there were just 13 colonies, simple towns along the East Coast. People lived simple lives. They were farmers, blacksmiths, shopkeepers, and teachers. They worked hard, raised families, and followed the laws of Britain, a country far across the ocean. But here's the problem. They had no say in those laws. The British king, sitting 3,000 miles away, made all the decisions. The people had no vote, no voice, and still, they were taxed again and again on tea, sugar, paper, and more. They felt it was unfair. Imagine working hard every day and still paying money to a king you've never even seen. That's how the colonists felt. After the French and Indian War, Britain needed money, so they taxed the colonies even more. New laws like the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, and the Quartering Act made life harder. People were upset, but most of them didn't want war. They just wanted fair treatment. They wrote letters to the king. They asked politely, but the king didn't listen. He sent more soldiers instead. People began to gather in homes, churches, and taverns, talking in secret, sharing new ideas. They spoke about rights, freedom, and justice. Regular people, farmers, mothers, and young workers, slowly began to hope for something more. They didn't want to fight. They just wanted to be free. But when no one listened, that quiet hope started to grow louder. A storm was coming, not of weather, but of change. The British Empire didn't know it yet, but their control over the colonies was beginning to break, and soon, a single moment would spark a revolution. This story didn't start with war. It didn't start with a gun. It started with just one question. Why should a king, who lives far away, control our lives? This one question started something big. A spark, a fire, a revolution. Let's go back and see what really caused it. In the early 1700s, life in the American colonies was peaceful. People were proud to be British. They drank British tea. They followed British laws. They lived simple lives as farmers, shopkeepers, teachers. But in 1763, a war ended. The French and Indian War. Britain won the war, but it cost them a lot of money. Now they wanted money back from the colonies. So they said, "You must pay taxes." But the colonists said, "Why? We don't even have a voice in your government." And this led to a powerful idea. No taxation without representation. Then came the Stamp Act of 1765. People had to pay tax on every newspaper, every document, even playing cards. Colonists were shocked. They protested. They felt betrayed. In Boston and other cities, protests turned to anger. Crowds filled the streets. Tensions kept rising. In 1770, on a cold March night in Boston, a group of angry colonists faced British soldiers. Someone threw a snowball, then a rock. The soldiers got scared and fired into the crowd. 5 colonists died. This was called the Boston Massacre. It shocked everyone. People no longer saw British soldiers as friends. They saw them as enemies and asked, "Is this what British rule means?" Then in 1773 came the Tea Act. Britain gave control of tea sales to one company, the East India Company. The tea was cheaper, but that wasn't the point. It was about power. So one night, colonists dressed like Native Americans snuck onto British ships and threw 342 boxes of tea into Boston Harbor. This was the Boston Tea Party. The British King, George III, was very angry. He punished Boston with new laws called the Intolerable Acts. Boston's harbor was closed. Town meetings were banned. British soldiers could stay inside people's homes. To the colonists, it felt like prison. No freedom, no voice. This time, all 13 colonies paid attention. They thought, if this can happen in Boston, it can happen to us too. So leaders from each colony came together. They met in secret. This was the First Continental Congress. It was risky, but it was the start of something big. Let's be honest, this revolution wasn't just about tea or taxes. Colonists wanted freedom in many ways. Merchants wanted to trade freely. Farmers wanted land without limits. Local leaders wanted power, not from a king across the ocean. This wasn't just a protest. It was about respect, dignity, and self-rule. They wanted a future where they could build themselves. But the king didn't listen, and the colonists didn't give up. Now war was coming. It wasn't a matter of if, it was when. In the quiet corners of early American towns, inside small homes, peaceful churches, and candlelit taverns, something very powerful was happening. Ordinary men, who would later become famous, began to gather in secret. These men included John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. They weren't soldiers, and they weren't looking for a fight. Instead, they were thinkers, intelligent, passionate, and deeply hopeful. They met quietly to talk about one bold idea: freedom. At the time, America was not a free country. The 13 colonies were under British control, ruled by a king thousands of miles away. People paid taxes but had no voice. The king made laws, but the people had no say. Slowly, many began to feel that this wasn't fair. But talking about change, about breaking away, was risky. Speaking out against the king could get you punished, jailed, or even executed. Still, these brave men met again and again, believing that people should have the right to choose their own leaders, to make their own decisions, and to shape their own future. Then, something happened that pushed their ideas even further. A man named Thomas Paine wrote a small book called Common Sense. It wasn't written in complicated words. It was simple, it was direct, and it was powerful. It told people that it didn't make sense for one man, a king, to rule over millions of people who lived far away. That book spread like wildfire. In just a few weeks, thousands of colonists read it, shared it, and started to believe that America should become independent. This was a turning point. What started as quiet talks among a few men was now spreading across the colonies. Ordinary people, farmers, teachers, blacksmiths, and shopkeepers, began to think differently. They realized they didn't have to stay under the control of the British Empire. They began to imagine a new kind of country, a country where leaders were chosen by the people, where laws were made for the people, and where freedom was not just an idea but a way of life. But dreaming of freedom came with danger. The colonies had no real army. They had few weapons. Most of the people were not trained soldiers. The British Empire was one of the most powerful forces in the world at the time. Choosing to fight for independence was like standing up to a giant, unarmed. Still, the dream kept growing. People were ready to take the risk, because they believed that living free, even if it meant sacrifice, was worth it. These secret meetings were no longer just about talking. They became the foundation of a revolution in the hearts and minds of people. And that is where all great change begins, not with weapons, but with ideas. In the end, it wasn't just about fighting the British. It was about believing in something bigger, the idea that a new world was possible. That one day, America could stand on its own, free and strong. And all of that began in silence, with ideas shared in whispers, and hope burning like a fire in the hearts of the brave. Part 4. It was April 18th, 1775, a night like no other, quiet but heavy, like the air knew what was about to unfold. British General Thomas Gage had received secret orders from London. Send 700 redcoats marching silently under the cover of night to Concord, Massachusetts, seize hidden colonial weapons, and, if fate allowed, arrest Samuel Adams and John Hancock, names that had become sparks of rebellion. But in the shadows, the colonies had eyes and ears. The plan leaked, and then a writer, Paul Revere, galloped through the dark, lantern in hand, whispering warnings from door to door. "The British are coming!" By dawn, farmers and blacksmiths had become minute men, clutching muskets with trembling hands. On the Lexington Green, just as the sun stretched its first light across the grass, they stood, ordinary men staring down the might of an empire. And then a shot. No one knows who fired it. Some say a nervous hand slipped. Others whisper it was a mistake. But that single crack of gunpowder ripped through history. Like a lightning bolt, the first shot of the American Revolutionary War. Within seconds, the British unleashed a brutal volley, and 8 patriots lay dead. The survivors fled. The war had begun, not in a grand hall or with signed papers, but in confusion, fear, and the ringing echo of gunfire on American soil. But the British march didn't end there. At Concord, the redcoats searched homes, barns, fields, but the weapons were gone, hidden, protected, and when they tried to cross the North Bridge, they met resistance. This time, the colonists fired back, organized, defiant. British troops fell. They retreated, and on the long road back to Boston, the trees, fences, and hills came alive with musket fire. Farmers, teenagers, and old men ambushed the retreating army in waves, like ghosts of a rising revolution. It was no longer a protest, no longer talk. This was a war no one could stop, a war that began not with a grand declaration, but with a single, unknown shot on a misty April morning. A shot that shattered peace, ignited rebellion, and changed the course of history forever.
The most dangerous place in the universe. Step 1. Neutron stars, remnants of supernovae, possess immense gravity and magnetic fields. Step 2. Formed from collapsed cores, neutron stars are among the densest objects in the universe. Step 3. Gamma ray bursts, powerful cosmic events, could potentially impact Earth with catastrophic effects. Step 4. Originating from massive star collapses, gamma ray bursts emit intense energy across the cosmos. Share your thoughts on these cosmic phenomena in the comments.